You can run on for a long time, run on for a long time, run on for a long time. Sooner or later, gotta cut you down.
Bonjour, ma bête Juju. Today we are taking a look at Godbound, the game of divine heroes, and its supplement, The Lexicon of the Throne, by Kevin Crawford, who is more t-shirts cup of tea. If you know T-shirt from the Week in Geek and the Midweek in Geek, I'll be on there this Saturday on the T-Shirted Historians channel, so you can come and mention Kevin Crawford and help us get drunk. Yeah, more his cup of tea than mine, and it's an OSR game, and I'll be honest, I don't really need any more OSR games unless I find the settings or particular mechanics especially interesting, and that was the case here. So this is going to be a slightly odd review because I am primarily focused on the mechanics of Godbound and its peculiar existence as an OSR game that doesn't really play like an OSR game. The OSR, for good or ill, largely has a reputation for brutal violence to low-level characters, and very few of them living very long until they manage to level up, and at which point they become a little bit tougher. And a criticism that is often made of 5th edition D&D is that the characters are superhuman. In this game, it's an OSR game, but the characters literally are superhuman. They're touched by god power, so they can take on, legions of normal soldiers, big scary monsters, that sort of thing, without necessarily breaking a sweat, which means that you have to ramp up the power level for the battles. Now, what interested me about Godbound after playing it and a few other of Kevin Crawford's games was the potential that I saw in this for covering the same ground as another entirely different game, but doing so in a way that was better. I like the idea of Exalted, the RPG. I don't much like the look of the new edition. They seem to have turned their back on these sort of anime-style art and hype and overpower that marked the earlier editions and made them more interesting. But the problem with Exalted was always that the system was clumsy and took forever. It's supposed to be this high-octane, super-heroic combat, and instead it took ages to get through a single turn of combat. Whereas in Godbound, you don't run into that problem, partially probably due to the relative familiarity of an OSR-derived system, but also many of the design choices that went into it. So this review is really about the system more than the setting. It does come with a somewhat generic but somewhat interesting fantasy setting where the gods have all died, but that's not what interests me. And to be honest, I think most of you, if you're OSR type people, and remember I'm not really, I think for you it's going to be most useful as a form of kit bashing if you want to include demigods in your setting or incarnations of the various gods in your OSR compatible game. So you do make up a character, and most of it is familiar and relatively normal. Maybe they're a bit more resilient than your average OSR character, and the attribute modifiers are compressed, so you don't get a +3 until you get to 18 in a stat. And you don't get any bonuses at all until you get to 13 to 15. So if you're used to 5th edition, that can feel like a bit of a jip, to be honest. But there's no reason why you can't retcon that for everything, should you so wish to. You do all the usual stuff. You got saving throws. They're a little bit different. So more similar to 3rd edition saving throws. You've got hardiness, evasion, and spirit, rather than one for each stat, or more typical throwback OSR stuff, saving versus wands and spells and all that. So instead you have more general saving throws. So that's nice. You get to define your character in terms of facts about them. This is not dissimilar to in Scarlet Heroes, where you can define facts about your character, and that gives you bonuses in certain situations. It's somewhere between a full and robust skill or proficiency system and something more like Barbarians of Lemuria, where you're defined by your role. But, you know, it gives a bit of open customization, which is always nice. What really differentiates your characters as heroes, as demigods, is, as in other Kevin Crawford games, damage that you do is done to the hit dice of the enemy, not their hit points, and damage done to you is reduced and taken as hit points. So you still roll dice for damage, but depending on the dice type and what you roll, that's how many points of damage, and when it comes to the enemy, that's how many hit dice of damage that are done. It also has the fray rule. This is basically a free dice that was also present in Scarlet Heroes that represents minor little bits of magic or combat flourishes that you do during your main combat. It means you never feel entirely useless, which is nice. It does restrict it that you can only use this on lower hit dice monsters, so it's good for taking out additional minions and so on. It's meant to represent things like, you go charging into combat swinging your sword, but you see an opportunity and you kick a goblin off the side of a mountain or something. You know, so it's just that little bit of extra. The real power comes from the various miracles and things that you can perform. So you're given access to things called words. So words is kind of like domains in clerical terms, and they grant you access to different powers. Like if you have alacrity as, like the god of speed, then you will get various movement and speed oriented powers, maybe extra actions, things like that. If you are a god of beasts, you will have dominion over animals. Maybe you can understand their speech or command them or summon them or even turn into an animal, that sort of thing. So this is all like domains. But you start out as a demigod, really, so you start with lower level powers called lesser gifts, and then later on you can upgrade to greater gifts, which gives you more capacity and some real sort of landscape altering effects. So the idea basically is that you are some sort of new incarnation of a new pantheon. You're seeking to establish power, a cult or religion around yourself, and to ascend to full godhood from demigodhood. And there's a good number of words here and guidelines, to be fair, certainly in lexicon, for making your own. But you can take inspiration from myth, legend, anywhere you particularly want to look. You can also grant power to your followers. So if you've got a cleric of the god Dave, god of queuing, then that cleric might have access to magic through you. So you can bestow gifts upon your followers. There's domain level rules about establishing temples and cults and so on, and what that does for you, what you gain from having people worshipping you and following you. And your player group is called a pantheon for obvious reasons. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff about the background, but it's not that important. Like I say, this is really more of a toolkit sort of game. And to that end, there are quite a lot of fairly useful tables for generating all kinds of things, different courts, their mood, what the people there are like, criminal organizations, rules for creating ruins and their inhabitants and the treasures that you might find there, all very useful in any mode of play. And Crawford seems to be encouraging or enabling solo play as well, so you know that's something to consider. that if you're into solo play, I'm not, but you might be, then that's in here and it's useful. And if you're not a solo player but you're a writer, using solo play tools can sometimes provide inspiration for stories that you want to write, perhaps. There are monsters, not a huge amount, but pretty much anything OSR is cross-compatible. I mean, basically you just need to know it's hit dice, and you're good to go, largely. There are rules for creating your own new foes of suitable scale for fighting with demigods. Things like big monsters, dragons, Hydra, that sort of thing's useful. There are examples of magical artifacts of suitable godly power, but not that many of them. Slightly odd, perhaps out of place, but reflecting the kind of toolkit sense of the world. There are rules for cybernetics and clockworks. Now, that might seem out of place, but then if we think back to like Greek myth, the wings of Icarus, golden eyes, Hephaestus was always making stuff, that kind of makes sense. And it also might be fun to combine this with something like Cities Without Number, to play almost a Matrix style campaign, or a new age of gods arriving in the future, somewhat like what happened in Marvel's 2099 continuity. That might be something fun to have. So yeah, I mean, I came to it looking for a toolkit. I found a toolkit for the most part, and I think it's capable of doing something like Exalted better than Exalted does, which is kind of ironic because some of the big adverts for Exalted back in the day were, it's time to grow up from D&D and play a big boys game, which was an interesting marketing tactic, I think. For all it was somewhat true. So Lexicon of the Throne is a supplement for it. I bought this one because I wanted the additional words, and you get a couple of dozen new words, new concept words, ways to create new words, and new strifes, which are kind of like the opposite, I suppose, and a bit more detail on creating religions and so on. So even if you're not going to be playing demigods and gods, the rules and stuff in here can be useful if religion plays a big role in your other OSR games, and you want to include cults, gods, demigods, people with ambitions of becoming demigods, that sort of thing. So it's got broad utility across the OSR. Right, scores. So I got the print-on-demand version, which I believe is done by Lightning Source through... it used to say in the back. Oh, here we are. Ingram Content Group UK Limited. Right, I think they print through Lightning Source. The print quality's not the best. Might not really be worth getting the colour version. I did, because I'm an idiot. But there you go. In terms of writing and so on, there's nothing to really complain about. Yeah, it's a lot of useful tools, and if that's the approach you take to it, and I could have done without the generic-ish fantasy world ideas that are present in here, and I can just use it as a toolkit. But I don't think I'm going to be disappointed, because there's not too much on that, and then there are ideas that you can rip off and use in your own games. In terms of style, then, pretty average, really. Not fantastically stylish. You know, sometimes it's just nice to have something with a simple, readable layout, and that's all you really need. Cover's a little bit understated. I suppose they could have gone for something a bit more exciting and super heroic, but a bunch of skeletons trying to get to a throne, yeah, it's somewhat evocative. So style, yeah, a high 3 for style. In terms of substance, knowing what I came to the game for, being forewarned and forearmed, and there is like a free quick start that you can get hold of if you just want to get a taste of the rules and so on. You might not need anything more. But in terms of substance, I can't really fault it, to be honest. It had to include some game world background, and just because I find that less than useful doesn't mean anyone else feels the same way. So yeah, I'll give it a low 5 for substance. So that's 4 out of 5, 8 out of 10. Recommended if you're an OSR type in particular, but you want to play something more heroic or even a superheroes campaign. I think you'll find a lot of inspiration from Godbound, and in my opinion, it would do Exalted better than Exalted. It would do Mutants and Masterminds better than Mutants and Masterminds if you just put a little bit of work into it, which I think a lot of OSR type people are DIY people, so the Lexicon of the Throne, mostly black and white. It's a relatively slim volume at 90 pages as compared to, let's see, 240 odd pages, which is actually not. It's nice not to have a 500 page tome. I know it's hypocritical of me given Whitechester, but still. And this is all useful. Style-wise, a bit inconsistent. The writing's still fine. The artwork's a mixed bag, I suppose. But the main thing is the content. So style, a high 2 in this case. Substance, 5 again. It's full of useful stuff. The new words, advice and so on for game balance and religions and so on. Yeah, it's all useful. That's the main thing, I guess, Crawford's books are good for, is useful material, rules and ideas that you can nick and riff off for your own games. So yeah, that's what the weight is. So that's a 7 out of 10. That's a 3.5 out of 5. Mostly useful if you're committed to doing something with Godbound and you want the scope of the additional words and ideas. So there you go. An OSR game that doesn't play as a grinding misery tour. Zang.
A lapidary of wondrous stones and a bestiary of sundry creatures are 2 OSR resources by Neil Coates, providing you with the alchemical and magical supposed properties of stones, and a bestiary of all the strange creatures in their original interpretations in medieval lore. Available at lulu.com, DriveThruRPG, and post-mort.com.